So recently, thousands of Palestinian protesters gathered for the annual March of the Great Return, where they protest Israel's illegal occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Now, this took a turn for the worse. It got incredibly violent, and when I say it got incredibly violent, I mean the Israeli military brutalized peaceful protesters and ended up killing multiple people. So this Common Dreams headline pretty much sums it up really well. As March of Great Return begins, Israeli forces gunned down Palestinian protesters along Gaza border. Israeli snipers killed at least 15 Palestinians and injured hundreds more as an estimated 20,000 gathered along the Gaza-Israel border for the launch of the 6-week March of Great Return on Friday. Now, a bit of clarification. Since this article was published, the death count has actually risen to 17, and come to find out, there are now reports that Israel shot as many as 700 protesters. 700 peaceful protesters. So, as Jessica Corbett of Common Dreams reports, the beginning of the march coincides with the 42nd anniversary of Land Day, when Palestinians worldwide commemorate 6 who were killed by Israeli forces for protesting settlements in 1976. Ahead of the demonstrations, Gadi Eisenkot, Chief of General Staff of the Israel Defense Forces, gave soldiers permission to open fire on mass demonstrations in the event of mortal danger and announced that Israeli forces would deploy more than 100 snipers. The instructions are to use a lot of force, Eisenkot told the Israeli newspaper Yedioth Ahronoth. Organizers of the protesters, meanwhile, have encouraged marchers to remain nonviolent, and according to the Mon news agency, dozens of signs have been set up across the border in Arabic, Hebrew, and English, saying, "We are not here to fight, we are here to return to our lands." Palestinian protesters have set up tents along the border, and demonstrations are slated to continue through May 15th, Reuters reports, the day the Palestinians call the Nakba, or catastrophe, marking the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the conflict surrounding the creation of Israel in 1948. And May 15th also happens to be the day that the United States will be opening their embassy in Israel, which further fans the flames. So, this is absolutely unacceptable, and as usual, Israel is basically alleging that this was justified because they weren't peaceful after all. So the Israeli government released a video showing men with assault rifles trying to break Israel's fence, and one person was actually shot while running away with a car tire. Now, they claim that shooting someone in the back while they were running away with a car tire was justified because oftentimes protesters will light car tires on fire and roll them towards the Israeli military. Now, was that person actually planning to do that? We don't know. Was the car tire on fire? No. They were shot in the back as they were running away. Now, additionally, they claim that there were 2 men with assault rifles who were trying to break Israel's fence. And a lot of people are actually taking Israel's side because a few people out of the thousands upon thousands were menaces. And additionally, Hamas is claiming that 5 of the 6 protesters who were killed were actually Hamas members that decided to participate in the protest. So that may have been 2 of the men that Israel claimed were armed, but regular civilians, the overwhelming majority of which were peaceful, were not armed. And let me remind you that out of tens of thousands of people protesting, there were just a few that were even remotely antagonistic. So there's a lot of people defending Israel because, as usual, media coverage of this is incredibly biased. I believe it was Adam Johnson of FAIR who reported how NPR even covered this in a very biased way. They claimed that there was a violent clash, which implies that both sides were to blame, but in actuality, Israel was brutal here. They decided to kill protesters who were walking away from them. They decided to shoot a protester who was walking towards the fence. They shot someone who was praying, literally. And again, they shot over 700 people. This was a peaceful protest. So even if there were a couple of bad apples in the bunch, you can't tell me that by and large, this was a violent protest. But that's how Israel is depicting this event. Now, if you're still taking Israel's side here and you think that their response was proportional, well, there's actually a video floating around that shows you why the IDF shot one Palestinian protester. It's clear as day. Now, Twitter user Christian Tribert compiled 3 different angles showing a Palestinian protester being shot who was just simply walking towards Israel's border. He was not armed, but yet he was shot. Do you think they were justified in shooting an unarmed protester? If you think that that protester is wrong for trying to antagonize Israeli defense forces and walking towards the border, do you think that the proportional response here is to shoot him? Do you think that shooting someone who was praying was justified? So clearly, as usual, Israel is not allowing Palestinians to protest. I mean, we see the same type of response in the United States towards the BDS movement. This is a peaceful protest that encourages a boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel, but yet anyone who does this is penalized. There are some lawmakers who are literally trying to make it illegal to support the BDS movement. So if you're a Palestinian, they try to depict you as a savage. They try to claim that you're overly violent, but when you actually do participate in a peaceful protest, well, they'll still lie anyway and tell you that you were being violent. They'll still say that this was a riot, it wasn't a protest. That's what the Israeli government is maintaining. And really, you're not allowed to speak up. You're not allowed to speak up for your rights. You're not allowed to speak out against Israel's illegal occupation if you're Palestinian. So Bernie Sanders was, I believe, the only U.S. senator at the time I'm recording this that chose to speak out against what Israel did. And this is what he had to say.
You tweeted about this yesterday. You wrote, quote, "The killing of Palestinian demonstrators by Israeli forces in Gaza is tragic. It is the right of all people to protest for a better future without a violent response," unquote. The Israeli government called the protests, quote, "violent terror demonstrations." The ambassador of Israel to the United Nations said Hamas fighters were interspersed throughout the crowd using human shields and were killed after making, quote, "direct attacks on Israeli positions." Do you not accept the Israeli government's explanation?
No, I don't. I think from what my understanding is you have tens and tens of thousands of people who are engaged in a nonviolent protest. I believe now 15 or 20 people, Palestinians, have been killed and many, many others have been wounded. So I think it's a difficult situation. But my assessment is that Israel overreacted on that. But again, the bottom line here is that the United States of America has got to be involved in dealing with the terrible tragedy in Gaza. You know, whether it is Syria, whether it's Yemen, whether it is Gaza, we're looking at the need for the international community led by the United States to deal with that situation. Gaza is a disaster right now. Youth unemployment is off the charts, and we're going to continue to see those kinds of demonstrations and protests unless the world community recognizes the problem in Gaza and brings the Israelis and the Palestinians together to start addressing those problems.
So I'm glad that Bernie Sanders is taking a strong stand here, and he's condemning what the Israeli government is maintaining, because they're just lying at this point. And you really don't see a lot about this. Even a lot of activists who are progressive don't speak out. And there was a great piece in The Intercept by Mehdi Hassan, who basically coined the term PEP, progressive except for Palestine, because there's a lot of progressives who economically, they are progressive. They check all the boxes, Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, but they won't really speak out against Israel's war crimes and the brutalization of peaceful protesters like we see here clearly. And is this the first time that peaceful protesters have been brutalized during the March for Great Return? No, it's not. And yet progressives like Elizabeth Warren, they don't really speak out. Now, if I'm wrong, I'll give you an update at the bottom of the screen with her statement. Any other progressives? Jeff Merkley going to speak out? Never. It's never the case that they speak out against what Israel is doing. It's because they're progressive on every issue with the exception of Palestine. Now, Bernie Sanders, he's not necessarily exempt from this because he's been pretty bad on the issue as well. He doesn't support BDS. In fact, during a 2014 town hall when Israel was bombing Gaza and they killed hundreds of civilians, his response was that Israel has the right to defend itself. So certainly, we've dragged Bernie along to the correct position, but this is going to continue to happen unless the United States, an ally of Israel who has a lot of sway and influence over what the Israeli government does, takes a strong stand. But we're rewarding them. We are opening our embassy in Jerusalem. Rewarding them. So unless the United States tells them to stop, this will continue.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.